WNST.net. We have been talking tons about Muhammad Ali and the life and times and the impact. We're certainly going to get back to that all week long as I'm allowing lots of my friends, people writing these incredible stories about Ali to tell their story. I'll be monitoring the Stanley Cup and the NBA all week, as well as it looks like Cleveland's not going to get that parade. But we got a team in town here with the Orioles right now that had a parade. They know what it feels like. I saw all of those crazy images, and this is a guy that was in Baltimore for a long period of time at WBAL. He's a longtime friend and now the voice of the Kansas City Royals out in the friendly heart of the Midwest. He makes his triumphant return here, not only to Baltimore, but to WNST. We welcome Steve Stewart, one of our defending champions, back. What's up, champion, man? How's that ring doing for you, Steve?
Well, Nestor, I got to say, it feels good. It always feels good to look at it and put it on, no doubt about that.
Well, I mean, you get to look at it and put it on, but that doesn't mean that it means anything in the standings this year, right? And I think
no way.
For any defending champion, this is the tough road. And obviously the injuries, Moustakas, all the things that have gone wrong. Royals very much in this, but much more contested this year than it was last year.
It is. The division, the Central Division is, last year the Central was supposed to be a dogfight and be wide open, and the Royals were picked, to finish third or fourth in it. And the Royals, went 7-0 to start the year and kind of ran off and hid from everybody, and the division wound up, other than the Royals, being pretty disappointing. This year is playing out a lot more like what was predicted last year, where it really has looked right from the start like a 4-team race. Minnesota, the only team that isn't in it, but the other four, Detroit and Cleveland and the Royals and the White Sox, are all duking it out.
Well, and I would say that where the Royals are, coming into this series, not a real good look that they didn't hit the ball against Cleveland over the weekend. And hey, by the way, Indians are pretty good, right? That shortstop special.
Francisco Lindor is, there's a lot of really good young shortstops in this game. And Lindor is right at the top with Carlos Carrasco, or with the shortstop in Houston, and they catch the ball pretty well, but boy, their starting rotation is as advertised. And Carlos Carrasco came off the DL to face the Royals Thursday night after only one rehab start, and he was only on an 80-pitch limit, and he's their best starter when he's healthy. He probably gave him the worst start of the weekend, and he was still good. That's how good their starting pitching is. I mean, top to bottom. I mean, Kluber was outstanding. Danny Salazar was outstanding. Josh Tomlin, their number 5, began the year 7-0, and now he's 8-1 after beating the Royals the other day.
Well, we saw them last weekend, and I said, they're better than I thought they were going to be. I'm shocked to see the White Sox do the fade. I mean, they had a hell of an April and early May, and they started the fade, and now they've fortified. And I think a big part of the story last year with the Royals was the fortification with Zobrist and adding Cueto. I don't know that the Royals have the firepower to pull that off this summer.
It's hard to say. A lot of the experts seem to think the Royals don't have, and a lot of what the signals the Royals are sending out is they don't have as much to trade this year as they did a year ago. I'm not totally convinced of that, because even though their farm system isn't ranked near the top, they've got some pretty nice pieces down there. The question for the Royals will be if they're going to enhance their team is how many holes do you need to fill, and if so, can you fill them all? Are there too many holes to fill? That's what we're going to find out. We don't know yet. In some respects, they've overachieved, considering, like you mentioned, Moustakas out for the year. I mean, he's a big part of this team, not just for what he does. He's a very good defensive third baseman. He's a power bat from the left side. He also plays with a fire. He plays maybe not angry, but with an edge that, we've only had him healthy for about the first, I'd say, 2.5 weeks of the season, and he hit like 7 home runs. He was off to a real nice start, and then he got hurt, and he came back, and he immediately got hurt again. So we basically haven't had him other than early April. And Kessler Cuthbert has played really well at his place. He's a right-handed hitting third baseman. He's only 23, and he's a young major league player. But they miss Moustakas. Gordon got off to a poor start. He'd be the first to tell you. He said, I've been awful. He was very upfront about it. But over time, that it's going to be there for him. He's a Gold Glove outfielder, and he's a quiet leader by example, and another left-handed power bat. So there's 2 left-handed power bats you don't have right now. Then you lose Salvador Pérez. Thank God it was only for a week. You know, when he went down, it looked like for the whole next 20-hour period, everybody was holding their breath thinking, boy, he could be out for the year. And there he was over the weekend, back a week later. So that's probably the best news we've had in a while. So having said all that, with all those guys hurt, plus we lost 2 starters to the DL early, 2 starting pitchers to the DL early, the fact that they've been, you know, in first and near first throughout the first part of this year, first third of the season, is very encouraging because, as you know, Nestor, it's hard to repeat in any sport, certainly hard in baseball. And this is a team that has played a full extra month, both 14 and 15. So, you know, last year they didn't show the wear and tear of the extra month in 14, but this year early on they kind of did, and then they say they've kind of stabilized. But it certainly has not been it has not been an even, steady ride. There's been some ups and downs early for sure.
Steve, I thought Moustakas was sort of the heart and soul of the team, in my opinion, but obviously Hosmer's the guy who has emerged as a special guy that's going to need to get paid there, and putting together one hell of a resume that includes that ring on your finger, right?
Oh, yeah. Hosmer is as much fire as Moustakas plays with, and as important an element as he is to this team. Hosmer is definitely the lead dog. He's who knows how long we'll have him, but for now, you know, he's really kind of this year's George Brett. He's kind of the golden boy who, you know, hits in the clutch. He wants the responsibility of leading. You know, if nobody else in the locker room feels like talking, he'll stand up and talk every time before and after any game, win or lose. He's just that kind of person. And he's really embraced that role. You know, he's only 26 years old, and so yeah, he's had a fantastic start to the year. But his problem over the years, like a lot of players, is he's been a bit streaky, where he'll be on fire for a month and then he'll go into a terrible slump. He has a very kind of a little bit of a long, complicated swing that at times he'll get out of whack with it, and when he does, it takes him a while to get that timing back. This year so far, we haven't really seen that. The only fear now is Kendrys Morales, the DH, who had a beast of a year last year, has not hit, and Kendrys hits behind him in the order. And this past weekend in Cleveland was the first time we really saw another team strategically just avoid Hosmer altogether. And in fact, Ned Yost moved Morales down another spot in the order, put Perez behind Hosmer, and over the weekend, and then put Morales after that, so Hosmer would have at least somebody behind him, because Hosmer had not been intentionally walked the entire year until the weekend, which is almost hard to believe because he's played so well.
Well, and Morales, I mean, incredible disappointment. I mean, there were times last year when he was the best player on the field, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously as a DH, but yes. I mean, he quietly, you could argue, you could just about argue he was the most valuable player of the team for everything he did on and off the field. Because here's a switch hitter with power from both sides of the plate who can hit to all fields from both sides of the plate. He's also kind of a Papa Bear, and even though he doesn't do English language interviews, he's a Cuban native. He speaks okay English, and certainly in the clubhouse. Hosmer, by the way, that's another thing about Hosmer. He's from South Florida, and Hosmer speaks Spanish, which that certainly helps him too, because we, like every team, we have a big Latin contingent on our club. But Morales hit behind Hosmer last year, of course, and Hosmer had a really, really good year, and he had that beast of a switch hitter behind him every time, and it really helped Hosmer relax at the plate, knowing he had big Kendrys coming up after him. This year, Hosmer hasn't had that same assurance, and yet he's still thriving, which tells you that he's getting better with maturity and experience.
Steve Stewart is the longtime now voice of the Royals. How many years for you out there in Kansas City since you left us here at WBAL in Baltimore?
Well, I was in Cincinnati for 4 years after Baltimore, and now this is my 9th year with the Royals.
So 9 years with the Royals, the first 6 relatively sleepy, you would say, right? And I'm sure they still licking the wounds of Johnny Damon and Zack Greinke and Carlos Beltran. Those were all guys that were there. Now to see the stands full, to see the richness of all of this, I mean, the Hosmer thing's going to be a hot button, probably in the same way that here in Baltimore we're going to have that with Machado. They're going to have that with Harper in D.C., probably with Correa, Bryant, all these young players, where the market is right now. I don't know how much money they could put in front of Hosmer long term to make him say yes.
It's definitely going to be the biggest challenge. One of many impressive feats by General Manager Dayton Moore, who is, right now, right this month of June, celebrating his 10th anniversary as the Royals GM, a job which he was advised by several people in the game not to take, but he took it anyway.
We had that going on in Baltimore too. A lot of people told Buck and Dan not to take this gig, right?
Yeah, and he had turned down. I think he had turned down a couple of other clubs and taken himself out of some other jobs. But the Royals, happily, you can say now, had the advantage that although Dayton moved around a lot as a kid, a lot of his formative years were spent in the state of Kansas, and he was a Royals fan as a kid. And so, so he had that connection, and he wanted to really resurrect it, and obviously he has. But, one thing that's been really impressive as he's gone along is, even though he traded Greinke basically, demanded a trade and, more or less threatened to, to the point where he would have retired rather than come back. He was very unhappy at that point. But he extended Greinke before free agency by a couple of years. He signed him to a 4-year deal. He extended Billy Butler before free agency by a few years. He did that to Salvador Pérez years ago, and then he did it again this year. He did it to Alex Gordon a few years ago, and then he did it again this year. He did it with other guys, too, who aren't coming to mind right now. But he has basically anybody he's wanted to, so far, he's been able to do it. This, of course, will be the ultimate test because with the economics, with Hosmer's age, and let's face it, age is one of the big reasons Jason Hayward was so desirable last year because he was only 26. Well, Hosmer he'll turn 28 at the end of the 17th season. So he'll be, just entering his prime. He's a very athletic, big guy. He's 6'4", but he's not a big hulking guy. He's, knock on wood, he's limited his injuries in his career, and all the great intangibles we talk about. He's a Gold Glove first baseman defensively. He runs well for a guy his size. We all remember the dash home in Game 5 of the World Series last year when the Royals wound up coming from behind to beat the Mets and win it all. And he has so many intangibles. He's never hit 20 home runs in a year. Part of that is the ballpark we play in Kansas City, but he does everything really well. And people in baseball know how good he is. And, Mark Teixeira out with the Yankees now, and Greg Bird went out earlier. And, like a lot of kids, when Hosmer was growing up, the Yankees were good, and he has family there. And so Hosmer, there's a lot of fear that they could come get him. But Dayton has a good track record of keeping guys. This will be the ultimate test. And this would be by far, if they are fortunate enough to keep him, would be by far, I'm sure, the biggest contract in Royals history. We'll see.
Steve, we've talked a lot about the hitting. Let's talk about the pitching a little bit here. I'm a Ventura guy, right? I caught on to the bandwagon 2 years ago. I thought he was the next coming of something maybe special. He hasn't been the worst starter given the starts by Medlin and Young earlier, but he certainly hasn't been their best, and I was expecting some latter-day Pedro Martinez. I really expected him to be special. It doesn't look like he's that right now.
It's been very up and down. He started over the weekend in Cleveland, and he's really been having trouble with fastball command, which is obviously very dangerous for a pitcher, a starting pitcher. But I think his start over the weekend was 6 innings, 1 earned run, with only a couple of walks. So, we're seeing a little progress. Consistency is always the toughest thing for any big league player, certainly for a starting pitcher. And, he's a pretty important piece. Now, he's another guy, by the way, that Dayton extended. Last year, Dayton signed him for, I think, 2 or 3 years beyond what would be his free agency. And so that's another guy he locked up long term. Now, again, it's always a gamble when you do that because obviously you're banking the guy's going to continue to get better and that it's going to wind up being a good deal for the ball club. Hopefully that'll be the case for Yordano. I think he just turned 25 over the weekend. I think he's still trying to figure out who he is. Mickey Callaway is the pitching coach of the Indians, and he was talking about Carlos Carrasco, who's now 29. And he basically was telling us that Carrasco was kind of where Yordano is now a few years ago. To use the cliche, I hope you can hear me over the Pratt Street traffic here downtown. But he was using the cliche of, trying to find himself and figure out what kind of pitcher he was. And Carrasco, even though he's just off the DL now, is arguably the best starter on maybe the best staff in the league. And so Mickey, who is a very good pitching coach, has been in the game forever, he saw some Carrasco in Ventura. So it's really hard to say. He's a bit of a coin flip right now. He's not 6'5". He's 6 feet tall. He's very strong, and he can throw 97, 98. He doesn't always need to throw 97, 98. But he's a fascinating guy. But he and Danny Duffy, this team won a World Series in 15. The number 1 and 2 starters when that season started were Yordano Ventura and Danny Duffy. Danny has been mostly in the bullpen this year. He's back in the rotation now, and Yordano's kind of been up and down. So, last year this team won sort of, you could almost say in spite of their starting rotation. It was just good enough. And they're, to this point, they're hanging around in the race, and they've been up and down and in and out of first place with a rotation that's just sort of good enough. And, the hope is some of those guys are going to pick it up as the season goes along. The other question will be, can the Royals, add to the mix at some point with perhaps a trade? James Shields, former Royal, went to the White Sox the other day, and so we'll see. It's quite the parlor game in Kansas City to try to figure out what's going on with his pitching and how Ned Yost can compete with Cleveland's rotation. We have a great bullpen. We normally play great defense. And, we're a pretty good offensive club that's down due to some injuries right now. So, nobody ever said it was going to be easy, and nobody ever feels sorry for you in the big league, that's for sure.
Steve, you mentioned the White Sox and their deal for James Shields. Evaluate that for us. I mean, look, as an Oriole guy that has watched Jimenez, I've watched all these guys struggle. Mike Wright probably doesn't belong in the big leagues. We don't know whether Gallardo's going to come back and what he's going to be if he does. I'd like to see James Shields on my team, and if my team picked up a $30 million commitment to that over the next 3 years with some opt-outs and whatnot without having to give away the farm, I thought James Shields came sort of kind of cheap if you had the money, if that makes any sense.
No, I know what you're saying. In baseball's insane economics, it was a fairly good economic deal for the White Sox. Shields has a special place in Royals history. It's funny because when the Royals got him and Wade Davis in the Wil Myers trade, after the 12 season, the baseball world just exploded, saying that's the worst deal anybody's ever made in the history of baseball. And all they did was get to 2 World Series and win one. And Wil Myers is having a nice career. He's been battling some injuries and stuff, but he's a good player, no doubt. But Shields taught the young Royals how to win, for lack of a better description. He plays with a fire and intensity, even though he only plays one out of every 5 days. Ned Yost said it's, normally you don't think of a starting pitcher as a leader on a team except the day he pitches because they only work every, 20% of the games. But Shields was the rare guy who really led all the time and taught them how to win. But then, at least from my view, we only had him 2 years. By the second year, it seemed to me at least like he was beginning to fade a little bit. He was never a true ace. He was never David Price or even though Price isn't quite having a price like here this year, but he's never was quite that. But he was a guy that was always willing to take the ball and go out there and be the lead dog and lead by example. And he's always been an innings monster, and that's one thing that'll help the White Sox. Is that even now at age 34, this guy is 200 innings automatic. Now the other side of it is, and the worry for the Royals, and the Royals were never going to give him $21 million a year, which is what the Padres gave him when we lost him.
Now the Padres don't want to give him $21 million a year, by the way.
No, yeah, you better not. You better believe it. I mean, it turns out to be kind of crazy. But the other thing about it is he a ticking time bomb? Bronson Arroyo was never on the DL until he blew out his elbow beginning of last year or 2 years ago. He was this freak of nature that never got hurt, and then one day he did. With Shields, you just never know. Is he that much of a freak of nature, or will he break down at some point? Because I think it's 9 or 10 straight years of 200 innings. And, I mean, this is not a big guy either. I mean, he might be listed as 6'2" or 6'3", but I'm not sure he's quite that tall. But, I mean, no doubt about it. He's been durable. He's going to help them. And the beauty with Chicago is, you got Sale, you got José Quintana. You're asking Shields to be your 3 or 4, which is on a good team right now, in a good rotation. He's a very good 3 or 4. So good pickup for them. It would have been great to bring him back here, but, when these deals get made, you see a player go from one team to another, and sometimes I think people assume this happens in a vacuum, like these two GMs had a conversation, and San Diego's GM didn't talk to anybody else. Believe me, Dayton Moore and Dan Duquette and every GM in baseball heard from A.J. Preller, because when you're selling a player like Shields, you want the best deal, and the more bidders, the better deal you're going to get. So whatever deal the White Sox made was the best deal that the Padres GM could get for him at that time. So it's going to be interesting to see how many more of these deals get made now in the next month or so.
Oh, you remember when the Royals were sellers, right, Steve? Absolutely, man. Hey, man, great having you on. Welcome sort of home again. I hope you enjoy your week at Camden Yards, but not too much. Always appreciate having you on, and I'll get back out there for some barbecue and some Royals baseball sometime soon. One of my favorite stops, it is my favorite stadium, along with Dodger Stadium, to come out and watch a game at Royal Stadium. Nothing better than seeing Royal Stadium full as well, right?
Oh, no doubt about it. Well, hopefully you're seeing postseason ball there again. No guarantees, but it sure would be fun to go back again. Nestor, thanks for having me on.
We got our own problems here, Steve. We got to get our pitching together.
That's right.
Be well. Steve Stewart from Kansas City, longtime voice of the Royals there, working on 9 years. And, of course, I know him back from WBAL when he was running around with the Orioles and running around with us in the media here in Baltimore low these many years ago. You can find us in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Download the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear. Royals in town. I'm talking a lot of Ali. We got Stanley Cup, NBA, and, of course, Luke and I out at Ravens OTAs this week and mandatory next week. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.